Welcome, everybody, to our Sustainability Trends in Immersive Design webinar for the TEA Western North American Division Education Series. Today, we are bringing you three subject matter experts who have more collective knowledge in this than most of the rest of the civilized world. So we are in good company. A couple of housekeeping items. Number one, just to announce, we are recording today. That means, please, everybody, you came in muted, except for us. Please stay that way. Do not feel obligated to keep your cameras on. The presenters will be pinned. Everyone else will just pop in and out. No need to have cameras on. We are doing this for the purposes of education and education alone. We are, although subject matter experts and we all work for somebody, we are here representing the Themed Entertainment Association. We're doing so in an agnostic sense, and we are really here to answer your questions and offer our knowledge. And by our, I mean those three people. For the greater good of the industry. We are going to record this. This will be posted on the TEA channel, as are all of our educational series. And with that, and without much further ado, sorry, one more housekeeping. Please feel free to use the Q&A function. That should be available at the bottom. If you don't see the Q&A button, click on your three buttons that say more, and it should be in that menu. We will collect those and save them till the end. And then we will get to those. If we do this right, you guys will fill that box with questions, and my job is going to be very easy. I'm just going to read them out loud, and our panel is going to answer them. If not, then I'm going to have to do my job and help the conversation along, which is great because we're among friends here. In no uncertain order, our panelists today are Lindsay Allen, who is the Sustainability Manager, Food and Supply Chain at the Disneyland Resort, Amy Pastor, who's the VP of Sustainability at EXP, and Evelyn Stewart, who's the Senior Interior Designer at Forec. Without any more fanfare, I'm just going to pass it along. We're going to skip the long-winded introductions and get you into content so we can talk real soon. Take it away, ladies.
Thanks, Andy. So just level setting here on today's topics, we are going to, really look at what a traditional design, planning, and operations, and what would it look like for these projects. And then also talk a little bit about some self-sustaining practices and how we can be better stewards of the environment in our everyday life. And then finally, we really do want to leave a lot of time for open discussion and questions. So please use that chat function or that Q&A function and ask us everything that you are really thinking of right now. So just to start with planning and design, so I'm an engineer by degree. I say I'm a recovering engineer because I really focus on a holistic approach to sustainability. And a lot of times my job is difficult because I don't get brought into a project early enough. And so critical that a sustainability expert is involved early in the design charrette. You want to understand those owners' project requirements and really set the goals for the project. And setting those goals also means understanding what your owner knows about sustainability and what their definition of sustainability is, because it's very different depending on the client, depending on the market, depending on the region. So our job is to make sure we're educating our clients, bringing those new innovations and technologies. And then also the most important thing I see is that familiarizing your team with the lingo, because again, people use different terms in different markets, different regions, and it's very important that you communicate and collaborate with all of your key stakeholders. And then finally, that value add to the project. It's not always about the first cost. It's usually comes back to the payback and what you can produce in the end of the day. So the lingo, we all hear the word carbon. I'm sure many of us have not gone a single day without hearing carbon. So I always like to start with this. There are two types of carbon in building. There is embodied carbon, which is all the emissions from the material, manufacturing, transportation, installation of those materials, and then the operational carbon, which is that emissions from your building energy consumption. There are, if you might hear a lot of people talking about the stages of carbon. So A1 through A3 is that product. You're going to extract those materials, you're going to take them to a manufacturing site, you're going to manufacture them and then bring them on a job site. And then really embody takes you all the way through the operational where you're actually using the building. And then there's the end of life, which is when you demo that building and hopefully reuse that product. And then there's emissions. I'm sure many of you heard about people talking about the greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of people use greenhouse gas emissions interchangeably with CO2, but the reality is there's various gases that are considered greenhouse gases. But when I have this conversation, because I talk in scope 1, 2, and 3, I like to say, it's site, source, and supply chain. So your scope 1 is anything direct on site. Direct emissions, if you have a fossil fuel boiler, if you have fleet vehicles. Source says scope 2, and that's all of your electricity transmission and your purchase energy. And then finally, your scope 3, which is your supply chain. So many of us on this call are probably architects, engineers, designers. We are our client's scope 3. So when you hear some of the folks like the Disneys, Universals asking for your emissions data, it is because we are their scope 3, which primarily makes up the majority of many emissions for various clients. So leaning back on embodied carbon, we like to say early and often. So looking at materials will be really critical. Selecting the right materials, doing it early enough is very important when you're having that initial charrette. And primarily because you want to make sure you're sourcing those materials from local, if you can, reduce the transportation emissions, but also because you start to look at costs. The earlier these decisions get made in the process, the the cheaper, I says, you don't have as high a premium because it's baked into the construction cost. And then you can, have those conversations with the client saying that, this is a better product and it's going to give you a healthier building. Evelyn?
Thanks so much, Amy. Yes, so on my end, as on the project management, design, and guest experience team, it's been so helpful to kind of have three of our perspectives looking at a project kind of holistically from end to end. So if I'm in the middle looking at what can we do on a project level, it's on a smaller scale typically, but it's such an important thing to really ensure that early buy-in opportunity with your client and just looking at it from the onset of having sustainability as this key crux of people, planet, profit. I know we've all heard that before, but really you looking ahead, we want to use sustainability as that key. And with that, a lot of our clients, our brands have corporate sustainability missions and goals. So if we can leverage that and build it into the contract, build it into the budget, ensure that there's sub-consultants like my panelists along the way, then that helps the design later on. And then of course our guest and the end user. So just noting that at the onset is so important.
And you're gonna hear all three of us actually, but Evelyn and I talk a lot about different frameworks for sustainability. It's not promoting one or the other, but I find that it helps the conversation when you start to use some of these frameworks like LEED in the discussion, and then also advocating for LEED, Envision, WELL certification, or even just aligning with the UN Global Compact and the Sustainable Development Goals. So when we talk about having these early conversations, I bring up LEED because I'm a LEED geek, but also because there have been studies done that the earlier in the project that you bring these decisions up, the less of the premium. So meaning, 1 to 2% is not that much when you're looking at a 30 to $40 million project. So the earlier you can get these decisions in, the less cost it will be. Now, when you get to something like platinum, yes, there is a premium because you are implementing renewable energy sources. You're probably doing enhanced commissioning with monitoring-based commissioning, maybe even building envelope commissioning. You're probably selecting some premium products. But the reality is, earlier the better. and you don't see that significant premium, that, I like to bust that myth. It is not more costly. So being a lead geek, it is one of the frameworks that I like to use. And just, hot off the street, lead version 5 is now out. It was ratified and published on April 28th. And it really starts to look at this vision for US Green Building Council and what the next 25 years are going to look like. So it focused on 3 central areas of impact, which is decarbonization, that quality of life, and then ecological restoration and conservation. And what this means is decarbonization, we've heard it. So it's focusing on the emissions reduction from more than just operational, right? Energy has always been a focus, but it's the operational carbon, the embodied carbon, those materials, emissions from refrigerants. Think about how many refrigerants we're putting into these buildings, and especially when you start to look at some of the newer heat pump technologies, what is it going to do when we start to put these refrigerants in there? And then finally, transportation emissions. So it really starts to look at the full life cycle of a building, and everything is decarbonization, or everything about decarbonization, not just that energy piece. Quality of life. This starts to integrate the premise of well, where we are looking at better indoor air quality, the materials that we're selecting, things aren't off-gassing, allowing people areas of respite. I love that credit, for example, because it gives somebody a place to, get out of a hospital and maybe bring nature in, or go outside and be within nature. And there's healing elements to that. A lot of looking at circadian rhythm and daylighting, and that's where that bringing nature in, it helps heal people, and it helps to bring you a better feeling within these spaces. And then finally, ecological conservation and restoration. We have done such damage to the planet. What can we do to make sure we're not looking at greenfield spaces and building on new land? What can we do to conserve what we already have? Because we've gone beyond, we've done too much damage. And I don't want to be a naysayer and Debbie Downer, but the reality is we really have to start looking at how we can restore the sites that we have disturbed. So this is just, again, saying when it was ratified, there's multiple rating systems, but the 3 that are focused is new construction, interior design and construction, and then operations and maintenance. So looking forward, there's a 5-year cycle. So, lead version 6 is already in development, and that'll be released in 2030. But it really starts to align with, I'm hoping I have some structural engineers and some architects on this call, the 2030, AIA 2030, MEP 2040, SE 2050, starting to align with those goals of the industry. And then looking at how we can take buildings from design and construction through operation and maintenance and get that performance monitoring. A really big change is platinum certification. It's not just 80 points anymore. So it's going to be mandatory credits, most of those that align with decarbonization goals, and then having a dynamic digital interface where we can start to see, which is how projects are going to be registered. Again, so focusing on energy use reduction, it remains a priority, but there's substantial changes to how performance is verified. And then also reward it, because, the realization is it's not just about energy, it's about other parts to decarbonize. And then the rating system really starts to integrate social equity and that all-important resilience. I live in Florida. I had a hurricane come through 2 years ago, and I got flooded. I live in Central Florida. I'm nowhere near a body of water. The rain just saturated us for 36 hours, and groundwater hit everybody. So it's, climate change is real. We see these changes. We need to make sure we're resilient. And then again, that larger focus on total emissions. It's no longer just about that operational emissions.
That's so helpful, Amy. Thank you. We just wanted to talk about those UN Sustainable Development Goals as kind of a recap. Like LEAD is so fantastic, like you said, at framing the big picture and how it's all integrated. And if we just take a step back to the UN Sustainability Development Goals, there's 17 and they're all super applicable no matter your scope of work, your site. And so we've just selected 6 here that we use in our project development at kind of the design onset. So really kind of focusing on those key categories such as good health and well-being. A lot of people don't realize that impact on the user, on the guest is so crucial in terms of wellness. And I think that's we're kind of changing that through sustainable design and really looking at that. So just looking at all the areas that a themed environment can benefit from the sustainability intention. So these are kind of those main categories. And if we want to talk about, clean water is huge in almost all themed entertainment projects. Clean energy, renewable energy, really creating community, sense of place in a lot of our projects, responsible consumption and production. I know Lindsay is our expert on kind of what happens after our user has even left, and really looking at exactly the life on land, the impact of our sites on what was there before us. So if we go to the next one, just on a planning and project kind of design team, this is where it's kind of a helpful approach to start thinking at the onset and all the way through, creating almost tracking systems that rely on your team as experts. I know sustainability can be kind of this overwhelming thing, but if you think about a multidisciplinary approach, it's an opportunity for everyone at every project level, from juniors to senior landscape architects, to become experts in their field. So a strategy we've taken on is creating checklists that break down those different categories and allow the person on that project team, depending on the scope, depending on the site, to really zero in on their expertise, albeit an interior designer looking at well standards, or in Ontario, we have the sites program and maybe a higher level of restrictions than where our project might be internationally. So really relying on best practice rather than just a lead standard or a checklist, making it more of like a holistic approach that can be applied throughout all levels. I think that's it.
So
Yeah.
without those policies and those checklists, I like to joke that people often call me the sustainability police. I'm fine with that because that's what our job is. That's what Evelyn and I are here to do. And we talk about those frameworks, but I mean, the reality is sustainability has to be put into practice. And you need somebody when they're early on to make sure that you're policing the design team, the construction team, that commissioning team, and then of course training the operations and maintenance. So I just like to say we're there to follow the rules, to correct those naysayers, to monitor those, those design reviews are so important, to start to do site walks and even, yes, dumpster dives. I have a client that dives in the dumpster and makes sure that things are sorted correctly, because not only is it critical to their goals, but because if there's hazardous waste in their dumpsters, they're going to get fined. So it's very critical. It's more than just, oh, I want a plaque on the wall, I want a certificate. It starts to, have environmental impacts in certain cases. And then yes, we are there to file paperwork if we need to. So transitioning into operations, it's what I love about a sustainability consultant and what I love about my job is we are that transition. Depending on if you are in a traditional design bid build, if you're doing design build, depending on what your project looks like, you may not have a person that started at the beginning of the project and goes through the end. So your sustainable consultant could be that person, and so can your commissioning agent. Again, being a mechanical engineer by degree, I did commissioning forever. And the most value that I added to a project was being able to be in early, sit down with the designers, and I'm not looking at how to design their buildings. I am looking at how we can enhance the operations and really start looking at things from maintenance and operations considerations. So when we start to translate basis of design into sequences of operation and then how we're going to actually execute them and test them in the system, is so important that we make those early design review comments to make sure that all of the points are there, that the BIS can do what it's saying, that the equipment can do what it's saying. So one thing that has really been important in those early discussions, if I come in as a sustainability consultant, is asking the question to the owner, do you have commissioning? And then educating that it's often required by code. So there are jurisdictions that aren't enforcing it, but when you look back at, decades ago, commissioning is part of an international energy code. It's part of the Florida building code where I'm at. It just hadn't been enforced. So being that educator to your clients is really critical, and then starts to add that value to the project. And the other thing is when we talk about operations is it's using what you have. I mean, I like to say this is the basis for sustainable living. Don't use more than you need. Don't go and buy something if you have it already, if you don't need it. And we start to look at this adaptive reuse and this revitalization as we're going into, maybe operating a little bit differently versus designing new. So just again, education purposes, adaptive reuse is that's reusing an existing building in a different capacity than their original purpose. So how many of us are walking down warehouse districts that now become these hotel and residential and mixed use areas, and revitalizing? How can we rejuvenate or restore a building, a community, and really bring it a new and improved state and bring folks to it like we can with Leads for Cities and Communities or just general park revitalization?
Yeah, that's perfect. On a design and kind of planning level, we are seeing so much in that revitalization kind of effort. And for a designer, what better opportunity is there in terms of a challenge as to really feature, your site, feature the brand, the product in an innovative way, whether that's, repurposing some of old product or really highlighting the process. We think it's really where things are going, and it's to our benefit to kind of build that into the concept and really kind of bring all the conceptual design intent back to what the user is going to take away from it. So something we're really seeing in our field is this drive from younger guests to know that they're going to a brand that's sustainable, to know that they're going to experience something that has a larger message or has done their research. So that consumer power is really exciting. And if we can tap into that from a concept level and really bring it into almost like a sensory experience, it's only to the benefit of the design in the end.
Thank you, Amy and Evelyn. It's really cool. I'm very much situated in the operation. So it's really incredible to hear the work that you all are driving in the design phase. To Amy's point, it's huge for the operational considerations in particular. If our operators can't get to a food waste dumpster or there's not enough room, how are we supposed to divert our food waste to landfill or, follow the legal requirements around hazardous waste? So a little bit of background about me. My background is actually in agricultural sustainability and supply chain sustainability. I come from a background of working with farmers and farmer support organizations. And so it's kind of funny that I ended up working for Disney. But the thing I think that brought me to Disney is food and beverage. And I personally think I might be a little biased. I personally think it's a great case study for operational sustainability and understanding really how sustainability is integrated into each part of the operation. So I know this slide looks a little bare, but bear with me. Amy, could you click? Thanks. So it's easy when you think of food and beverage to just think of what you see on your shelf, on your grocery shelf, or what you open in your fridge, or what you see on your plate when you're dining out. But really, there's so much to a food and beverage supply chain. The area that I focus on specifically at Disneyland Resort Sustainability is an area which we mentioned earlier called Scope 3. And as Amy pointed out, Scope 3 looks like different things for different companies. So our Imagineers, for example, since they own all new build for the company, they're going to be focused on that embodied carbon. But for our operation, specifically for Disney experiences, specifically for our parks, where we're doing such high volumes of food and beverage service for all the guests that come through our gates, our highest source of Scope 3 emissions is actually our food and beverage supply chain. So it's my team's job to understand how do we reduce those emissions both upstream. So that's farm gate, that's transportation and logistics, transporting, tomatoes to processing where they're put into a can or where they're transferred into ketchup, made into ketchup. And then, moving downstream and from kitchens to what we put on our menus, creating climate-friendly experiences for guests, as well as how guests are experiencing that food and how they're able to dispose of it afterwards, so food waste. But this also doesn't just tie into Scope 3 too, it also ties very clearly into Scope 1. specifically for that transportation and logistics, specifically for processing, how are processing facilities built? How are we transporting this food? What equipment is in our kitchens? And so we can go ahead and click. In addition, water, how are we engaging blue foods and making sure not to harm our ocean ecosystems? And so these are the goals that I represent for Disneyland Resort for our company, the Walt Disney Company: net zero emissions, zero waste to landfill, water responsibility, circular materials, and sustainable design. And food, like I mentioned, feeds into all of this. And it's my privilege to get to work and collaborate with the operation on all of this. And it's interesting because in my role, in Amy's role, it's very much, Amy and Evelyn, it's very much like, okay, we have to make sure we're sticking to these standards. These are certifications, these are commissioning, permitting opportunities or requirements. But for my role, the operators don't actually have to work with me if they don't want to, right? And so I have to really come into it and figure out, how can I show you that this actually builds business resilience, and that, understanding the link between that supply chain and these goals is something that's going to help us all move forward and do better by people and planet. And so, for example, Toontown, we were really excited to collaborate with the team there and open our first ever electric kitchen. So this is my favorite picture that I've taken of Toontown. That's why it shows Mickey's Runaway Railway. But Cafe Daisy is right next to it on the left side if you're looking at that picture. But Cafe Daisy, next to Mickey's Runaway Railway, opened with our first ever electric kitchen. Additionally, we divert over 6.5 million pounds of food scraps from landfill every year. That goes to, so I don't know if everyone's familiar with the EPA's hierarchy of what you can do with food waste. The best thing you can do is rescue as much as you can. So uneaten food that is rescuable should be donated or diverted to people who, or diverted to systems that can consume it. But under that, the best thing you can do with your food waste that is not rescuable is actually divert it to animal feed amendment. And so that's what we do at the Disneyland Resort. And again, you have this 3-can system. How are you getting guests in an immersive design environment to be interested in that when they've got a lot more interesting things to do? Arguably, they got an attraction to get to, they've got a parade to see. And so really everything that we do related to sustainability is intentional. How can we draw attention to the fact that really we can only take food scraps in this waste stream because it goes to animal feed amendment, but do it in a way that still speaks to the immersive nature of the environment that we're situated in. That's where you see our droid on top of the food scraps can carrying a food scraps only, and a couple other fun figures at locations that have 3-can systems, as well as like, how is the can opening design? We have a rhombus for food scraps so that guests can't necessarily dump their entire trays into food scraps. That blue Saturn, that is a high key for recycling, a recognizable key for recycling in that gray landfill rectangle. Additionally, when we're talking about downstream and how we collaborate with our food and beverage teams to create exciting climate-friendly food experiences for our guests, Goofy's Kitchen, the buffet at Goofy's Kitchen is one of our most popular buffets at the resort. In Disneyland Hotel is actually over 50% plant-based. And one of the cool maneuvers that we did there was we looked at what was on the carving stations and kind of what was performing well, what wasn't performing well. And we were able to swap out a protein that wasn't really performing well with what you see Chef Cam, who led that initiative, carving barbecued pineapple with roasted tomatoes and mushrooms. And that's a hit for both the meat eaters who are eating other proteins, and it's an inclusive opportunity for our plant-based eaters. And not everything, we're really focused on what are the opportunities to have climate-friendly foods that make sense. Like, we know maybe a plant-based mashed potatoes, you need the milk in there, you need the cream perhaps. But there's other opportunities on the line, like, really good sweet potato hash or a kimchi broccoli fritter. Those don't necessarily need animal-based ingredients in there. And then lastly, kind of going back to that scope 1 goal right there, we have our first electric box truck at the resort. It was actually a food and beverage box truck. And, when we're looking at how we decide what to implement, which activations. We're really focused on data-driven decisions. And so we're understanding, you know, what legs are our vehicles making, what trucks are our vehicles making, so that when we electrify said vehicles and trucks, we're making the right decisions and transitioning the right operational vehicles at the right time. And so, you know, I think it speaks to the nature of food and beverage deliveries and how that runs. The fact that it made sense for our first box truck to be a food and beverage box truck. And there's Chef Jay, who led that initiative along with our lead receiver, Joe. So like I mentioned, in operational sustainability, you know, what's really at the forefront of this at the moment is how do we make data-driven decisions with our guests kind of at the forefront of that. You know, as Evelyn mentioned, guest preferences are differing as you see younger guests have more money to spend and, you know, are now the ones leading the pack with ticket sales. And so how do we understand these newer demographics of guests, of spenders, in order to understand how we unlock opportunity with them and how we make sure we continue to integrate sustainability into our operation in a way that appeals to their interests, to their needs, and to what they're willing to participate in. And, you know, also understanding what barriers they're facing. There's a really great example on the right side. I mentioned, you know, 3-can system. It can be a tough nut to crack for any operation, how to get guests to make the right decision in that kind of 7-second window. And so you can see kind of an older version of our 3-can system above at the same location. This is at Galactic Grill in Tomorrowland. And this was kind of a regular site at our 3-can system, and probably any 3-can system where you have folks, like, think of an airport where you have folks from multiple backgrounds, locations, experiences come in and trying to understand where to put what. And so what we've done, you're seeing like a small glimpse of it because this is an entire system, but we've really focused in on understanding directly from guests. You know, what barriers are you experiencing at the cans? Where would it make sense for you to get more information on how to experience this throughout your food and beverage experience? You know, how do we help you? And that really helped us say, okay, we need to create a scrap scoop that's, you know, an extra tool that easily fits on the tray with our food and beverage service to help them, give them a separate vessel to sort those scraps into and kind of be able to easily dump when they get to the can. We need some more clear signage at the cans. We can't have too much mixed messaging. Too many pictures might get confusing and it takes too long to read. We need some digital screenage, some extra information nudges at the beginning so people understand what is expected and why it's expected. And so that's really helped us below, as you can see, kind of get guests on board, continuing to get guests on board and partner with them to create healthier outcomes for the people on the planet.
I'm always the person who puts the trash can in the plan, but it's so great to see what happens after. So thanks, Lindsay. I love that. And just building on that, and a local kind of case study example of this kind of growing movement is actually a music festival close to my home here in Ontario. That's called the Hillside Community Festival, and it's one of the most. It's won a bunch of like sustainable tourism awards because its intention is to be carbon neutral, large scale festival that really centers around sustainability. And the biggest kind of win for that is that it is single plastic free. Everyone uses reusables. There are volunteers that bike from food station to food station, collect it, have a dishwashing station, all these trash turnarounds. All the beer is on tap. They've done all of the things, and it's really exciting to see that kind of has existed for a long time, but is kind of gaining momentum and is a really good example to share with clients that these things can be done. It does take more effort on the planning and big picture, but if there is an interest and there is a lot of really fun, innovative ways to achieve it from festivals, but also permanent entertainment venues as well. And then going right into project vision. So there's so many opportunities, whether it's in the contract or not, it's in your scope of work or not. This is where, as a designer, it's an exciting challenge to be able to look at all the facets of a project and where can we put our best practice forward in, if it's a water park in a part of the world that doesn't have a lot of water, desert like condition, then what is our job to be the most responsible with the planning and the design? So can we create passive cooling structures? What are the opportunities? So we kind of look at the different categories and see where we can have the biggest impact or least harm and in our kind of design decisions. So we've got climate comfort, we know is very important. Like Amy mentioned at the onset, we're kind of past the point of preventing. The heat shade is a huge concern in almost all projects, no matter where it is, and really being responsible with new strategies of how to deal with that. And we all know landscaping is fantastic, but it takes a long time for it to come into full effect. So what are the day one solutions? What are the phased approaches? And how can the site grow with the guests as well? So looking at, again, those low impact wins. There's some very easy wins. We all know on my end with interior design, sustainable materials, and just looking at renewable energy, but really thinking of the site as part of your project vision and what can you harvest on site, what can you offset, what opportunities are there to look at holistically on a design level. So something we've started to implement, which is really helpful, especially when we want to kind of encourage the client to do more than what's kind of required, is to create a sustainability master plan. And that's very often a think local, act global kind of approach, and really zeroing in on, like we said, what is the project? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And kind of this is a diagram to show a water park in Saudi Arabia, where we know that that's a concern, but there's actually a lot of really, really thoughtful strategies we can implement to kind of create opportunities for resilience, but also looking forward. So something that's really been a great strategy is to look at traditional cooling methods. A lot of the sites have architecture that was ancient and they did it before we had air conditioning. So kind of tapping into local experts and really thinking about it based off what's available on site. How can we feature those products, specifically materials? Is there something that we can reuse from an existing site nearby or something that might be connected to the theme or brand? And again, the sustainable landscaping is a huge component in treating the project holistically as well as water resources.
Anyone?
I think Lindsay,
Oh, Lindsay, you're muted.
Yeah, she's
Sorry, I
muted.
did the fatal forget to unmute. One thing to consider is kind of how we are telling the story. So when we try to appeal to guests either in the design phase or in the operation phase, it can't be successful unless it's really helping guests understand where to tap into. And so putting that at the center, for example, this is more product of our research and trying to understand what will drive guest uptick and participation in our food waste programming. And one of the things we learned, like I mentioned before, is guests want to know why they're being asked to do what they're being asked to do. And so these food scrap follow along kind of info pieces help us are a fun thing to add to our trays that help tell the story to guests of our food scraps program and why we're doing what we're doing, why we're asking them to collaborate with us, as well as some fun nudges that are themed to the land. So you'll see, inside the utensil dispensers, we have some area for signage. And so we're able to plug into, the Tomorrowland utensil dispensers, a reminder, fun reminders, or, that can also be translated into Hungry Bear Barbecue Jamboree in New Orleans Bayou Country. We rethemed that recently, so I'm very proud I nailed it. Flows, Viet Cafe, and Cozy Cones in Cars Land. And all of these have different themes, which can often feel intimidating. And it's typically been a barrier for us in trying to understand. They don't talk about trash and the planet of Batu. But we can really get creative and figure out, knowing that we have a responsibility, and knowing that, guests are caring about this, we know that this gives us an opportunity to really speak to sustainability, climate resilience, and messaging for optimism and what the collaboration is meant to accomplish.
I need to know where I can get that environmental hero pin.
Yes, I didn't speak to it. Yeah, so I will actually, fun fact, I don't know who on the call is based in California or is planning their next trip to Disneyland. It's our 70th anniversary, so we've got some cool stuff going on, including if you go to Tomorrowland, Bayou Country, or Cars Land, or Toontown 2, or Avengers Campus. Those are all areas that have 3 can systems. And you are seen sorting your food scraps into the food scraps can. You may or may not get a pin. Not that I'm spoiling anything, but it's a pretty cool trading pin. And so again, an opportunity to reward guests for participating and kind of, encourage guests. The goal is not to kind of trick that guest into doing anything that they're not interested in, but instead explore how can we bring guests along the journey so that when they leave our parks, they leave continuing to want to make better decisions for people and planet.
I will just stand by every recycling bin and wait until somebody approaches me with that pen.
Solid strategy.
And then it's hard to follow such beloved brands, but not all of our projects have such incredible established IPs that people, see it, they know the icons, they just buy in. So something on the design end, when you have a client that it's their first space, or it's you have the opportunity to kind of create an IP or a brand with their experiences. We're really leaning into sustainability messaging through the characters and using those as that edutainment moment. Lindsay was talking so well too, and really making that this design full circle of, it's a branded experience from start to end. So you're leaving with maybe your eco plushie of the characters you've met. They're telling you the story throughout. Maybe there's the different opportunities to learn about what messaging that each of them is giving you, and then there's an opportunity to take home even product if it's a retail or F&B from something made locally. There's just an example at the bottom right from one of our projects in Vietnam where it was sourced tea and all sustainably harvested on site and as part of the collective experience. So there's so many opportunities to really, again, build it into the concept. It is harder to cut when it's really in your characters, it's in your messaging, and it really gives us power as designers to kind of see those sustainability efforts through. So I think it's an exciting way to continue the experience after you've left the site.
And when we were putting together this presentation, we were talking about leave behinds and also, the importance of being at these places, right? We talked about Lindsay saying, out in California, we're going to go travel to the sites because we are doing consulting with them. what's cool about my job is not only do I get to work on projects, but I get to focus on internal corporate sustainability for our company. And we have been very proactive about trying to travel sustainably, meaning that yes, it is important to meet your clients face to face, but can you opt for perhaps a video call if it's only going to be a 10-minute meeting or a 1 hour meeting? So I like to take these leave behinds because even though we say travel sustainably, I'm usually one of the top 10 carbon footprint when it comes to travel because I travel so much. But to help with that, I always bring a reusable coffee mug or water bottle. It seems simple, but you often forget it. We purchase carbon offsets for our travel. So that's another way to, yes, we are traveling. Some people would argue that the offsets are just are not as good as not traveling, but the reality is we're trying to do better. The other thing, and I just threw this example here, is I tend to lump travel together. So if I know I'm sitting here in DC, I need to be in Chicago, and then I have to be in Toronto, I have to be in Connecticut. Can I make all of those trips in one 2 week leg? Realizing that it's not always going to work. But if I can make that happen, instead of going from Orlando to DC to Orlando, then Orlando to Chicago to Orlando, you can save leg, you can save money, but it's also just a little bit more sustainable way to travel. So just something to think about in your daily life.
I also have the opportunity to kind of be on our sustainability task force, we call it, on our team. And I really think there's such a strong responsibilities as designers to kind of foster that effort in your studio culture first before it can fully be realized in your projects. So something we like to do is really going back to the UN staples of that good health and well-being. We really focus on like peer-to-peer wellness initiatives. We've done wellness weeks where we bring in nutritionists for fun talks. We go, on bikes along the Toronto waterfront. There's lots of fun opportunities that don't feel really heavy or like you must do this, but opportunities we say to really engage with staff. We just did an eco swap where people brought in different things for Earth Day and was able to kind of swap what they have. And it's just those little opportunities. They're kind of low hanging fruit, but they really make a big impact. Especially with climate anxiety and everything. It's doing what we can, but we do see that it does make a difference. And something we do at our office, as you can see, our CEO here has our orange office bike, so it stays on site. It can be used for local site visits, but also we use it in different fundraising events like the local Ride for Heart. So that engagement, it is really helpful. It is something that's visible but something that's active. So we really like to start from the ground up. Yeah.
Wow, Evelyn, now I want to come to Toronto and visit your office.
Please do.
Figure out how to make a benchmarking case for to Evelyn's point, we're back in office. Most folks are being called back into office, if not already. And with office comes, more events, whether it's holiday events or meetings or, hosting vendors, that kind of thing, hosting clients. And so, making sure to consider as you're putting together events, how you can integrate sustainability. I saw some questions in the chat related to this, so excited to dig into it later, but reusables are the best alternative to plastic, hands down. And so if you have capacity, if you're able to, get those dishwashers going, working with your food service partners to plan around reusable utensils and dishware. And again, that's another visible, an intentional effort that, when your guests see it and they see, or your clients see it and they see it's possible, they say, oh, why can't I try that too? Same thing with a 3-can system, waste capacity varies by, municipality. And so perhaps it's not always realistic to have a 3-can system, but where it is possible, making sure, you've got those waste diversion cans set up so that you can ensure you're diverting as much waste from landfill as possible. Ideally, there's not much waste, especially if you're using those reusables. But if there is a possibility to divert food scraps from landfill, that is one of the best kind of sustainability moves you can do. Getting creative about decorations. Evelyn mentioned makers markets and eco swaps, and when you're engaging in that kind of thing, keeping an eye out for decorations or things that can be used as decorations, kind of leveraging extra wrapping paper during the holidays, that kind of thing, making sure things that you might normally only use once or disregard, figuring out how to leverage those. And consider prioritizing plant-based options on your menus. One thing story I love to tell with Disney is before I joined Disney, I kind of was on the fence about how I felt about individual responsibility. And then I joined a company where I work alongside 33,000 other people. And I know that my choice, in addition to their choices, adds up a lot into not only individual responsibility, but also collective and responsibility. And same with all of the guests that enter through our gates. And really kind of shifting diets is another hugely impactful way that we can make change toward helping kind of reduce the extremities of our climate. And so considering prioritizing those options, and again, giving visibility to something that people might not otherwise have a lot of visibility toward, like, oh, you can have really great plant-based food on a menu and it still be exciting and delicious and fill you up. So
I think with that, Andy, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you for open discussion.
That was so informative, and thank you all three. Even I learned something, and I pretend to know things. Okay, I'm just going to take these in the order we got them, which is not in any order other than I can start at the top and keep going. I'm just going to throw them out, and I'll let you guys answer them as you deem fit. All right, first question. What ideas have immersive design companies created to improve quality of life? For example, areas of respite, which you had mentioned previously.
Do you want
Don't make me throw a dart now.
To that one? I'm going to start with that one and then, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, Evelyn spoke to it a lot too with like the shading, thinking about maybe families aren't staying on property. And I have a niece and a nephew, and I remember taking them to Disney. I'm in Orlando, and my sister-in-law was insistent that we get a hotel that was within walking distance of one of the parks and or along the transportation line, because she was so concerned about having a place for the kids to be cooled down or, to be out of the sun. But it's creating these shaded areas, creating, when you go to Moana, what's the beautiful, what's the waterfall? Lindsay, help me.
I
Life
work
on
in times,
Life
so.
and water. Yeah. Life and water. But it's having those and integrating it again with the theming elements, but it is an area of respite. You walk through there, it's giving the parents a break because the kids are just kind of running around and you get to sit. It's pretty cool in there from a temperature perspective. But it's also helping alleviate some of the heat, and helping with folks who might suffer from heat stroke. It gets hot in Florida. So that's kind of the stuff that I've seen. Evelyn, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think, cooling cues is a big area of opportunity, we'll say. And I've been looking into, there's some really, going back to kind of more traditional methods, there's some really neat, like almost like clay beehive type structures that I'm not of the scientist engineer side, but it's effective of these passive cooling systems. And also there's something called like a swamp wall. And really, I know it's kind of from like Florida, like using things that will generate a mist just from its like cooling inherent nature. So I love that kind of opportunity of letting materials kind of do their natural thing, but using it for a challenge that we would be up against as designers. So trying to think of, rather than just like, is there, cooling fans that's regenerate, like basically trying to use what is already existing versus coming up with new solutions is always something I'm interested in. But yeah, there's I'd like to see where things are going with those innovations for sure.
Yeah, I'll add into that since the Walt Disney World example was brought up naturally. I have to bring up a Disney. I'm obliged.
Please.
Yeah, so Toontown, which was one of our more recently reimagined lands, was intentionally designed with areas of respite, and so you'll see kind of, and we don't actually have any grass. We have artificial turf for all of our grassy areas, and so we'll see turf areas that are shaded. There's some non-shaded areas, but really these areas in Toontown, knowing that Toontown appeals to families with younger children, are meant to kind of be that respite, be that area for families to kind of come and come down a bit. And we also have near our pier and our wharf in Disney California Adventure, kind of areas along the water that are quieter, that have benches, and that are really meant to kind of be moments of relief and a break at our parks.
All right. With regard to biophilic design, have there been any studies that measure the difference between artificial and live plants on human emotions?
That is not me.
That was asked by Mr.
I
Brown.
kill plants. So
I
that
can
is
say, so, I mentioned we don't have grass, because of where we're situated and trying to be responsible to that water stewardship goal. And I will say we do have a lot of horticulture, but not having grass has not stemmed the amount of emotion and happiness and joy that we see at the parks every day. So I don't have data on it, but I do, we do know that having that turf and kind of avoiding having grass that needs to be regularly watered or clipped has a positive impact and doesn't detract from our guest experience.
Here's a good one. What is the first aspect that gets cut when the project is over budget in your experience? Part 2. How do you show the long-term gains to offset this value engineering?
So I laugh because I think all three of us are going to answer differently. And I'm going to
Perfect.
I'm going to say that it is always the super efficient chiller plant that I want, or the ERVs, or the TOAS unit. It's always something with my mechanical systems that get cut first. And Evelyn probably has a different answer.
Well, it's so funny because Amy, it's usually on the interior design end of things, it's usually by the time it gets to us and our super creative, you know, material innovations or reuse, there's no budget left because of the commissioning and the operations side. So
Because
usually
of
by
your
the time
air
it gets
handlers and chillers.
You know what?
but it's true. It has to be holistic, but often it's, yeah, what are the big wins are the ones you can't see often, and ours are the more maybe obvious ones that tell that story, but it's being creative with what's available by that point. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So it's
think
a good question.
Yeah, I think all of us have probably had experiences where sustainability or certain activations have been first on the chopping block. And for our team at Disneyland Resort, this is where the data-driven decision making really comes into play. And like when you're looking at electrifying vehicles, which require charging stations, being very strategic and having platforms to really analyze movement of vehicles and kind of charging needs as well, to be able to really back up what you're asking for. And the same comes with dumpster space or dishwasher space, power capacity, all of these things that are needed to implement scope 1 interventions, as well as some scope 3 interventions. Really focusing on kind of the front end work, which can feel boring and frustrating sometimes, the tracking and the analysis. But when you get to the project development and implementation, you have what you need to make the case.
So to answer the second part of that question, which was about, how do you have those conversations? This is where it's the return on investment, right? So it's going to be the bigger upfront cost. But when you look at the operations and maintenance, the replacement value or the replacement cost, are you going to have to replace a direct expansion air handling unit more frequently than, say, a chiller plant? And the higher efficiencies are going to lead to lower energy bills. So your payback, I start to talk in the terms of payback. And then also what those systems can do when you're thinking about a themed entertainment, a park. The reality is some of those rides, give it 5 years, 10 years, they're going to be rethemed. So what you're putting in, is it a system that has kind of future life? Is it a chilled water system has a lot more flexibility than a direct expansion unit? So those conversations I feel are important. And then also looking forward to, as Lindsay said, electrification. Are there policies that are going to force you to remove natural gas from the site? So that also comes into play. And then again, you're talking about ripping something out and replacing it in 20 years, as opposed to just doing it now, taking the hit, and then getting your return on investment.
Yeah. And I think one thing to be mindful of as you're kind of working with policy and understanding what are the requirements is often we can get really focused on baseline requirements. And I think that's where goals can be very powerful. And like, what are the commitments that this company has made or, your client has made? And understanding that like there might be opportunity even beyond the basic requirement to reach goals or reach commitments and then also generate a decent enough or good or best return on investment. So something to keep in mind as well.
So kind of tailing on that one. We answered that question already, sorry. I like when we've doubled questions. That's great. What is your opinion on the practicality of reusable food utensils, plates, bowls versus single-use compostable versions in a themed entertainment setting? Lindsay, I think that one's at you.
Yeah, I was waiting for that one. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Let's see. It really depends on the waste flow of where the themed environment is sitting in. So if you are sending waste to a composter and that composter accepts, I think compostable materials are often PLA. If they are accepting PLA, then that makes sense. But if you, keeping in mind that nothing actually degrades in landfill, like nothing biodegrades in landfill. And so if you don't have a composter, or you're not sending food scraps or organic matter to compost, or you're not sending it to a composter that takes PLA, then I think you have to ask some questions about, does this make sense? I think reusable, like I mentioned before, reusable is definitely the number one alternative to single-use items, and should be strived for. Coming from like me personally, my experience in agriculture and supply chains, I think it's been a really tough sell to farmers to buy compost that has plastic in it. And a lot of these materials, these compostable materials, still have plastic in it. And the market for compost is typically farmers that are certified organic. These certifications are really tough to get. And there's a lot of anxiety about, compost that might be considered contaminated, that could lead to lost certification, that kind of thing. And so that's one of the reasons, these kind of, there's a decision tree of, what you're deciding to do when you're looking at waste diversion. And for us, animal feed for our food scraps seem really valuable in terms of kind of best return on impact.
And I'm going to add quickly because this conversation has come up with other themed entertainment providers and looking at the impacts of retrofitting of, an F&B or an F&B space with the dishwasher. We were actually talking about this on our prep calls, and the impacts that, adding a dishwasher, you're probably adding a booster, something to heat to 140 degrees so you can sterilize, the dishes and stuff. What are those impacts to the scope 1 and 2 emissions? Because you're now adding power, adding water, versus just throwing away the single use. It's one of those things, right? It's holistic, and it's one needs to balance out the other. It is, what is your preference? What is your priority? So we have this discussion a lot, and I'll tell you, there's no one right answer, because probably something for Disney might be different than some of the other named theme parks.
Okay, we've got one last one on the food. See, I said I was going in order. Now I'm trying to find the ones that group together. One last on the food topic, and I promise we'll move on. Can you expand on the idea of decarbonization of food? I am particularly interested, well, the question asker is particularly interested in the infinite cycle of nutrients. I think I know where this one's going.
Interesting. I'm assuming by infinite cycle of nutrients, you mean soil. I don't know that phrase specifically, but I can talk a little bit about how Scope 3 and food intersect. So this is kind of a new and old adventure for food in many ways. Sustainability has always been a part of food production. In order for farmers to sustain, what they grow, they have to be kind of considerate of the soil, but kind of the demands of what has typically been industrial food production systems are not always well aligned with that. And so figuring out, you've seen a lot of foods, various value chains across the food system trying to understand how to answer really big questions. And now this is starting to be understood as Scope 3, as companies sort of toward the end of the supply chain, middle and end of the supply chain, like Disney, where we're being held accountable for where our food is coming from and how it's being produced. And so we understand this in terms of carbon equivalent, so understanding kind of all the emissions that are coming from the supply chain, like different categories of emissions. So again, like farm gate, transportation, processing, and kind of understanding the carbon equivalent of all the emissions that are in that process, and working with our suppliers along the supply chain to come up with strategies to reduce that, and identify better ways of kind of producing what we need. And there's also ecosystem impacts too, and understanding how we align decarbonization efforts with doing better by the ecosystem, which can be tough sometimes. The debate between grass-fed and non-grass-fed cows, I think, is a great example of that, in terms of kind of like the discourse that happens between ecosystem and like a pure decarbonization lens. But these are, the fact that we're having these conversations, I think, is really important and exciting and necessary. And so that's really what it looks like. And then when we talk about downstream, I think we're doing a better job at large in the industry of understanding how to quantify downstream impacts. So I think that can be really tough for the average consumer or guest to understand. If I eat a plant-based meal, how is that helping further up in the supply chain? But when you think about the sourcing of where you're dining, and what your decision helps encourage for sourcing or kind of promote for sourcing, and what uptake of a meal item encourages for sourcing opportunities in the supply chain upstream, I think that's where it comes into play. But it can be hard to think about that because we don't learn about our food system in a supply chain context. So you have the meals, and then you also have food waste. People underestimate food waste contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but food waste generates methane, which is the most potent greenhouse gas. And so food waste is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions.
All right, Lindsay, we're going to give you a break here for a second. Could you give some examples of new or innovative methods that can be used to increase sustainability of attractions, particularly water rides or dark rides?
I guess I'll take that one. So with water, the big concern is always that somebody can drink the water, right? You have children going down slides, you have water parks. So it's, for safety reasons, you're probably stuck with using potable water. But innovations, are there attractions? Are there features that you could look at a gray water, stormwater capture? Can you look at other ways or other types of water to use where there aren't people going to be? You know, I know some of the water parks use foot sprays. It's so hot in Florida, so there's foot sprays all around, but that has to be potable because again, it's on your feet. Kids stick their feet in their mouths and things like that. So, but with with dark.
I wish I was still that flexible.
Listen, I've got a niece and a nephew. I've seen it, and I take them to the parks all the time. But you know, with dark rides, we're really starting to look at, you know, I say traditional things. We're looking at higher efficiency cooling systems. Evelyn was talking about passive cooling. You know, are there opportunities to, um, you know, retheme some of the areas, keep them outside, and you know, so that you don't have to have a larger cooling load inside because you're still going to have all that equipment, right? And then on the ride side is what is being housed inside, what is the efficiency, and can those systems become more efficient so there's a lower load, and then therefore we start to shift that, you know, those cooling and heating loads that you need and reduce the energy uses of those ride systems. So I don't know if Evelyn, is there
Yeah,
anything?
no, that's great. Yeah, just I guess the like you said, the biggest thing is cooling in those spaces. And so we kind of look at some neat innovations of trying to offset kind of that load. And are there renewable energy opportunities on site? We've been looking into some really neat products that, you know, there's solar panel roof tiles. So they have that characteristic style, but they can actually be used to harness the energy. Something I've learned from our kind of landscape uh, architecture team is using that gray water in other ways. So I know a lot of our projects in warmer climates, they have to physically like hose down all the paving, like you said. And so can you design it so that the runoff is now going to be watering the landscaping on the edging, or is there another opportunity to kind of collect the rainwater, or are there opportunities to just use that in other ways and just kind of offset off the impact of those more interior spaces? So
Yeah,
hopefully,
and you know, ideally, you know, hopefully people are thoughtful with their landscape design and it's, you know, native and adaptive plants, and maybe you can eliminate irrigation altogether, but that's not always a reality. You know, I think of some of the themed areas, if you're, you know, if you're in Epcot and you have different countries, you know, you want to bring in those plants. So that's something that needs to be taken care of. You know, in the end, it's a holistic approach, and how can we be responsible with everything we do? Because, you know, not one single thing is going to be the answer.
I think this
yeah,
is where also the operators come into play too. You know, our horticulture team saves an incredible amount on an annual basis, even in spite of guest numbers increasing. And that's because they've been really intentional about making sure to identify the right technologies to measure and sense what's happening with our irrigation systems, and really operate it in a way where it can be successful. So I think making sure to include the operators and kind of bring them along the journey is really important.
Sticking with facility questions, and I was going to add in something about renewables, but you guys got there already. Thank you. When it comes to green roofs and walls, and I love the fact that we're asking about the walls too now. I've seen some people use moss, saying it is one of the best plants for sustainability, while others say it doesn't make much of a difference and just use regular plants, whatever a regular plant is. Amy, we know you can kill them all. Don't worry, I'm right there with you. Is there one plant type that does significantly more per square foot than others? And if so, are there any downsides to using that over other choices?
I
Sorry, that was a
can
mouthful.
I can speak to the walls a little bit, especially from an interior perspective. We actually have seen a lot of moss tile products being used, and I would say there's many different wins you could have. So it's hard to speak to. It's kind of all depends on the client and the operator's goals. So if one of the goals is less water use, then moss is a fantastic product because you don't have to maintain it. A lot of them will maintain themselves, and it's basically just a material at that point. And there's some really great innovative solutions out there, but yeah, I guess it's what's the intent? So is it that it's a living wall then, and you want the look and you want the air quality improved, then there's definitely specific plants that help with that. I don't have them off the top of my head, but
We should have
yeah,
had Colin on this call.
it all I guess depends on your goal. So I would research what's native to that area, because like Lindsay and Amy said, that's kind of key. It's not bringing in a plant that wouldn't naturally thrive indoors or out in that area. And then, but yeah, moss is a kind of a trend that's really effective, especially in like signage applications. I've seen it in more of like a design tile kind of solution that seems effective in more of the biophilic, not air quality overall impact. So yeah.
You'd be surprised what you can work with in the kind of native landscape. It's funny.
Yeah.
I had to be at the Santa Monica Farmers Market for the first half of today because we were visiting with some of our one of our produce vendors, local suppliers, and one of the farmers was telling us about how he didn't realize, he's a potato farmer first and foremost. He's a row crop farmer, and he didn't realize he had rye naturally growing on parts of the land, and so now he plants that rye in addition as a cover crop, and so you never know how you can leverage kind of what's native to your environment to drive sustainable outcomes.
I'm just gonna nod.
Okay. You're just nodding on this one.
Yeah.
Here we go. I got one for you then, Amy.
No.
How can commissioning contribute to lowering a client's carbon footprint?
Oh, this is so wonderful. We are, so I like to call ourselves, with all due respect to the Navy SEALs, we're the Navy SEALs. So we come in and we make sure that all the systems are operating as they should be. And a lot of people will say, well, the contractor's doing that. They're starting up the systems, they're putting them in, into place, and they're ready to go. Well, are they? I mean, have they been tested through? Have they been integrated? So, we have a mechanical subcontractor that's installing the equipment. We have the electrical subcontractor that's powering the equipment. We have the controls contractor, which is usually separate from the mechanical contractor that's putting all of the controls in. We've got a test and balance contractor that's balancing the systems. So commissioning comes in and makes sure that all four of those, and possibly more, have done their job correctly. The biggest thing that we see is usually on the integration side. So when you start to run the sequences of operation, and that's what commissioning is, we're just trying to test and break the system so that when it breaks in the future, we know how to fix it. So the biggest thing that usually happens is the integration. So you're looking at a building automation system, you start to bring those points in, and you're standing in the field reading 72 degrees on your equipment, but at the BAS it's saying 75 because devices aren't calibrated, or the sequence of operations might just be coded incorrectly. So we are giving you a building. This is the short way of saying it. We are giving you a building that is operating as it was intended, and without commissioning, you have no idea if it's actually operating as it was designed.
Speaks to your ROI as well. All right, home stretch. Here we go. Here's a good one. What's the most creative or your favorite instance of adaptive reuse you've seen?
Oh, I love the warehouses that are now like restaurants, or we've got this really great, I'm just north of Orlando, and we've got this really great downtown, and it's an old jailhouse that's a
I'm gonna
restaurant.
bring that up.
You know what I want to talk. You've been
I know
there.
exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah. So it's like those are my favorite, because I really think it starts to bring the community back together, and people start to look at something that they'd never think. I'm not gonna go to a restaurant in a jailhouse, but it's really cool.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking locally here in Toronto, there's the Evergreen Brickworks. It was literally a brick factory. And like you said, Amy, there's something about adaptive reuse that, it's such a challenge to think of something new, but there's also such a beauty in letting that space just be a beautiful old brick factory. And it's basically, they've transformed the interior use, but kept, the site, kind of brought it back to where it is. That either they had to build a quarry, for when they were doing the bricks, and now the quarry is naturally filling back in. It's a beautiful, like, green kind of center in Toronto, and there's so much, kind of green initiatives happening by kind of letting it just come back. So yeah, I love those spaces that create opportunities, but it's not as fixed. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's
Lindsay?
so many.
I'm the Ellen brought a great one up in the chat. We have the hangar in Long Beach where I used to live, which I think it used to be an airport hangar. I could be wrong, but it's right next to Long Beach Airport, so I'm going to assume it was a hangar. But it's called the hangar. I think the things. I can't think of specific examples off the top of my head, but I do really appreciate examples of adaptive reuse that pay homage to what that space used to be and kind of honor, like, if there was a specific role it played in the community, make sure to honor that. Because sometimes, as we know, in the space of design, community change over a quick amount of time can be quite intense for a community, and making sure to kind of keep that integrity, and pay homage to the history and, integration of the community is really important as well.
Love it. All right. Speed round. Here we go. This is the best question to end on. What next action do you wish each person on this call would take to make their project work more sustainable over the next month? Call to action, call to arms.
Oh, each person, like, on the call.
Or each person, yeah. What should everyone in the audience take away with them?
Gotcha. I thought that, like, we were supposed to be thinking of ourselves in the third. Okay, I'm following.
No, we, and by we I mean y'all three, have done more than enough having ideas. But I think it's really, what is the takeaway of what should everyone be thinking about moving forward?
I guess, just speaking from my experience, there's no bad effort in sustainability. There's, even just bringing it up on a project call, no matter your level, what are the goals, looking at, what you can do just when you're doing your task rather than what, you have to do. I think that's the best thing you can do. I think we're all in a hopeful state of just do it anyways, and it's our opportunity to lead, by design. Oh, sorry, bad pun, but you really have to just I think just try. And if it gets cut, then you can get it in a different way. Like, you don't have to always announce that something's sustainable effort. You can just do it as part of the design. So that's what I try. Trying.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, like, from a practical perspective, I think divert your food waste and reduce your meat consumption. Those are the two things that the International Panel on Climate Change has said you should do. But, like, from a bigger, higher level perspective, I think systems. Every day I'm trying to show people that our supply chain is connected, and every decision across the supply chain affects sustainability and environmental outcomes, and not just environmental, but also people outcomes, right? Because we know that environment and people are very tied. And so, every day I work to try to show people how connected that is and how important it is to take into account. And I do that by illustrating how that impact, that kind of waterfall of impact. And so this, when you're approaching kind of sustainability problem solving, really focusing on data-driven work, to back up what you're saying, and then also systems. So, how are you ultimately, like, it can feel daunting, but I think it's worth the effort. How is your effort going to kind of impact the broader system, and being intentional about that?
I love that. So I'm just going to say, don't take no for an answer. I've been doing this for 20 years. I hear no 95% of the time, but I'm still doing it. So that's, I think, the best thing you could do.
Right. On that note, we are dead on time.
Look at that.
Thank
Great
you,
job,
panel, so
moderator
much.
Andrew.
Woohoo! I think this was wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your time. Thank you, participants, audience, spectators, viewers, and most importantly, the 15 questions that we got out of this crowd. It was wonderful. We are going to now go to our respective happy hours and see you guys on the next one.